My agent is working great, but it doesn't remember what I did yesterday. I'm Craig. I'm the CTO of GT Consult, and I'm taking you through our Agentic AI series. And today we're going to be looking at scenarios where you can store the history of your interactions with Agentic AI, and we use Cosmos DB for that. Why do we use Cosmos DB? Well, it is AI enabled in terms of providing a lightweight area where you can store data. You can also vectorize that data and store the embeddings within Cosmos DB. Now, we're specifically using Azure Cosmos DB for MongoDB as an easy way for us to enter into the Cosmos DB world. Also, it's a little bit cheaper when you come and have a look at your Azure AI functionality and the pricing models. In terms of that today, what we're going to look at is one of our previous processes where we were capturing actions from our CRM deals information, and that was automating a prompt through to a salesperson, saving a lot of time for our sales manager. Now we're going to look at how we can take that data that we're prompting on a regular basis and store that in Cosmos DB. You'll also notice as soon as you get into trying to deploy models from Azure OpenAI that the default for storing history is actually using Cosmos DB. So probably the best place at the moment to store that additional data. Reason why you want vectorization? Well, put it into layman's terms, we'll look at vectors today. It's an array of breaking up all of your token data into information that is more accessible for recognizing or understanding what you might want, and all of your requests and prompts are sent through in a vectorized fashion and compared against your data to get you the best results. So we'll look at that today. Let's jump into it. So let's jump into our agentic agent. In this case, it's a daily pipeline that goes to our sales manager. We looked at this in a previous series that you can find down below. And this has a daily trigger is an instruction that kicks off our process. So if we look at the flow that is behind it, because let's remember that if you go and edit these, they actually are Power Automate flows in the background. So we can open up our flow, which is our daily pipeline instruction, and look at the information that we're gathering there, and then see how we can push this into our Cosmos DB. So within our flow, we're grabbing all of our relevant information, and under our conditions, we do all of the heavy lifting to populate everything. Right at the end, we call our daily pipeline workings, which then pushes our data into Cosmos DB. One of the nice things about these agentic agents, and something I highly recommend, is taking all of the flows and putting them into a solution. That means that you can talk between different flows, so calling a child flow from a parent flow. And that means your agentic agents can talk to each other, or in this case where I've got something that is repetitive, like saving information into Cosmos DB, I only have to do it once and I can call the child flow. So we've done that in terms of our Zoho CRM, because remember we're using Zoho CRM here as our API where we get all of our information for, and one of the child processes is processing the deal change from CRM. Let's open that up in terms of the flow. So we start off with a manual trigger. Within that trigger, we pass through an ID. We also pass through a process, what collection we're going to be using, and what document type this is. Now, these are very specific to the structure that we've built in Cosmos DB. Firstly, the ID identifies which deal we're dealing with. The process might be whether this is a new deal that's coming in from Zoho CRM, or that this is now an update that is being made available through my agentic AI. The collection is where this data resides within Cosmos DB. And finally, our document type is a reference point that we use in other processes. But let's go and have a look at that structure. So let's start off in Azure and our resource group for GT OpenAI. Here we've got a number of different resources like Azure Search Service. So this is AI search, allowing us to index data. We've also got our OpenAI model, as well as a GT Mongo cluster. So this is where Azure Cosmos DB exists. Now, it's not very easy to read the information directly from Azure. So what I'm going to do is open up a front-end MongoDB Compass, and this allows me to look at my underlying data very much like you were using a SQL IDE to look at data. Does the same for a MongoDB. So in this case, we've got our GT Mongo cluster, and underneath that, I've got these collections for CRM, and guess what? We've also got one for projects. So whilst I'm showing you the information that we deal with CRM, we can do something very similar with our Zoho projects as well. Underneath that, I've got a database table, and that is called deal data. And if we click on that, we can open it up and it shows us all of our items that are stored within our Cosmos DB. Now we can see an ID, we can see a doc type being daily update, but there could be a host of other doc types in here, like the original deal. Then we have our deal data, the last note, as well as our link from our deal URL. All of this looking very familiar from our previous example where we were creating each of our line items using this data. And finally, we've got our embeddings. Let me open that up. And what you'll see here is an array of numbers. Those numbers are actually everything that we have within our deal data here converted into vectors. And this allows AI to quickly be able to search and segment data based on our search terms. But how do we get the data in here in the first place? So let's jump back to our flow. So within the flow, we initialize our OpenAI variables. Now we're utilizing OpenAI here to use the text embedding components for vectorizing our data. We go and get a authentication token for Zoho CRM, and we pass through our deal data into our API, and we ask it for things like the deal name, the last activity, the time of the account, etc. So all of the fields that we would normally be utilizing within our process. Once we've got that, we might need to sanitize the data to make sure that if the MongoDB, Cosmos DB is expecting a number as an example, we're not passing it a null value or blank value. These are some things that we learned through the process. So deals, you can imagine if a deal doesn't have a amount, well, then it comes through as blank or null. You might probably want to change that to a 0 or something of the sort. We also go and get our note data. So in one case, we've got the deal, we've got many notes that belong to that deal, and we go and grab those as well. We compile that all into an object, and we use that object for embedding. So we take the object, it's got the ID, the doc type, the deal data, the last note, and the deal URL. So it's all of our fields except for the embedding, and we call an embeddings model. Now, in terms of that, that's calling OpenAI. It uses the TextAD model for embedding, and that's part of our deployment in Azure OpenAI. What that does is it takes all of the information that we posit and it converts it into those vectors. That's that array of data that we saw in the model there. Finally, we create a final object. Now, this is the object that we're going to be sending to Cosmos DB. It's exactly the same as our previous object, except note here that we've got the embeddings, and it pops in the data that comes from the HTTP call to our Azure OpenAI model to embed the data. Once we've got that, we update Cosmos DB. Now, in terms of updating Cosmos DB, the best way to go about this in our world was to create an Azure function, and that Azure function passes in all of our data and then prompts that into Cosmos DB. You can have functions to update, to delete, to add, really whatever you want to push that information into Cosmos DB. But what will happen is our flow will run for every single deal, runs through this process, and then pushes that data directly into Cosmos DB. As a special add-on, guess what? We did the same to AI search. So in this case, taking those exact values and pushing it into our Azure OpenAI search, which means that the information is already indexed. Now, with the new tools within Azure OpenAI, and the AI agent services, you can ground your data with a couple of different areas. The one being Azure OpenAI Search. Now, we've already seen that in Copilot Studio. You can use Azure AI Search to ground your data and therefore minimize the amount of tokens that you need to send through to OpenAI because it is aware of your data already. In Azure OpenAI Services, you can actually use direct connections into Cosmos DB to start pulling the data together, and that uses indexes. So let's jump back into our campus, and we can see here that we've got a number of indexes, and as one of them is our embeddings index. that uses the data in our embeddings field to be able to allow us to search through and index the data based off of our embeddings index. So nice way to grab information and store it within a location that we can then search through as use in terms of the history. Now, where would we use this data? Well, once again, if a salesperson or sales manager is expecting a salesperson to complete a task, but they've got an agentic agent that allocates the task to them, the sales manager doesn't know about it. If that person just closes the task, well, how are you going to realize, well, here, because we've got our data in this Cosmos DB, we can go and reference how many times has it asked the agent. If it's been more than 3, guess what? Tell the sales manager. So these are the types of updates that you can do by utilizing the Cosmos DB to provide additional context to any of your deals. The nice thing here is obviously with the documents having a document ID, so we can pull all of these together in a simple search when we go and retrieve the information from Cosmos DB. And how do we retrieve it? Using the Azure search function as well. So jumping back into our data here, we've created GT Cosmos Connect, which is our Azure function. Within that Azure function, number of different functions that we've generated, such as getting an item from Cosmos DB or updating the item. Very simply, just in terms of the connectivity here, if we open up that Cosmos DB, the function itself, minor connectivity information in here, as well as telling it what collection we should be using, what database we should be using, and then decides what it should do, either update or insert the data. And that really takes us through our functionality. So hopefully this will help you in terms of understanding why you might use Cosmos DB in your agents. We most certainly recommend it, especially if you want to add additional context in any of your calls. And if you can ground the data against the Cosmos DB, even better. So hopefully that helps, but it might have been too technical and a whole lot of gibberish. So if you need someone to do it for you, give us a call.